The employee emphasizes that all the fortune belongs exclusively to him by right, and not to the young lady who lives on the property. The carriage finally parks in front of the main entrance of the imposing and luxurious mansion of the family. Upon getting out of the transport, Elric reflects that if money were Tyria's only motivation, she would have left a long time ago, considering that a year has already passed since the passing of his father. He concludes that if she wanted to, the young lady could have claimed the fortune as an agent and left there, which proves that her remaining on the property was an entirely personal choice. The young master asks the coachman if he knows the reason that led his wife to make such an unusual decision. All the old sighs and explains that the young mistress is an extremely reserved woman, confessing that they were never close enough to share intimate confidences. He describes the bride as a person of haughty nobility and difficult to approach, making it impossible for a simple servant to question her motives. Elric agrees that she seems to be someone complicated to deal with, and highlights that she is still a complete stranger to him since the two only saw each other in person a single time. The elderly man gives a light pat on the horse, and ponders with wisdom that in truth practically every marriage of convenience begins exactly in that manner. The young man begins to climb the stone steps with difficulty, resting all the weight of his injured body on his cane. At the top of the stairs he comes across Teria leaning on one of the imposing columns, appearing quite shy with his approach. The young lady hides her reddened face under the brim of her large hat, demonstrating the obvious embarrassment she still feels by her husband's presence. She squeezes her own hands firmly against her dress, revealing her extreme shyness and internal agitation with the sudden encounter. With hesitant steps, the young bride begins to walk slowly toward the residence's entrance. Upon noticing her presence, Elric takes the initiative and asks, in a gentle manner, if she just returned from her stroll. Surprised by the approach, Tyria blushes intensely and inquires with surprise when it was that the young man arrived from his trip. She holds a small bag of wheat and explains shyly that she just returned from her routine of work in the fields. The protagonist feels his own face heat up with his wife's physical proximity, and tries to disguise his enormous nervousness before her. He suggests in a friendly manner that the two enter the mansion together, and the young woman agrees immediately with a light nod of her head. The couple begins to climb the luxurious internal staircase side by side, maintaining a silence loaded with shyness and tension. Elric observes her from the corner of his eye while mentally cursing his own mouth for always creating extremely strange and uncomfortable dialogues. While walking beside Tyria, Elric notices that even dressed in simple work clothes, she carries an innate and extremely elegant air of nobility. He catches himself thinking if the young lady already possessed that striking and haughty presence 10 years ago when they married. The young man remembers vaguely the image of the bride on the day of their wedding, when she seemed a shy and radiant young noblewoman. Suddenly, a loud noise brings him back to reality and makes him jump in shock in the middle of his thoughts. Due to his injured leg, the protagonist ends up tripping in an awkward way and startles his wife, who asks, worried, if he is okay. Elric strikes his cane against the ground with force to regain his balance and avoid an embarrassing fall. He forces a yellow smile and lies, saying that he is great, claiming that his legs just failed for an instant due to the long walk, while he questions himself for how long she watched him walk in that limping way. The young man apologizes for not being able to carry the bag of wheat for her due to his injured leg while they continue climbing the stairs. Tyria answers that it is okay and that she already got used to that, which makes the protagonist feel quite ashamed and awkward for having abandoned his wife for so long and now offering late apologies. The young bride stares at him with her striking golden eyes, transmitting a calm and deep seriousness in her gaze. She explains that she meant she got used to the heavy work for having learned everything directly from the late patriarch of the Portman family. Surprised by the revelation, Elric mutters that acting in a rigorous way and demanding the most from others was indeed the characteristic way of his late father. The young man recalls that the patriarch Hovan Portman was a tireless man who made a point of personally inspecting each sector of his businesses, including the vast wheat plantations. He reflects that as his father had liquidated all the other ventures, leaving only that farm, it was perfectly natural that he had transferred all the administration of the lands to Tyria. The steps of both finally silence when the two interrupt the climb and stop at the top of the mansion's hallway. With a serious countenance, Elric hesitates for an instant before bringing up a subject with the young lady about a quite personal theme. Standing right before the imposing portrait of the patriarch Hovan, the young man asks with curiosity how his father's days were before he passed away. Tyria answers in a cold and direct manner that she only learned the farm services with him, confessing that she does not remember almost anything besides the professional obligations. Upon hearing his wife's distant answer, the protagonist grips the handle of his wooden cane with even more force. He finds the courage and asks if, by chance, his father ever once mentioned his name or asked about him during all that time. The young lady answers in a short and simple manner that no, leaving the young man with a light sad smile on his lips before the confirmation of paternal coldness. He reflects silently that that was a peculiar combination of an insensitive father with a woman of few words, making any dialogue between them purely commercial. The young man looks away and accepts the sad reality about the distant relationship he maintained with his late father. Thérèse asks for permission to withdraw and return to her daily duties, leaving the young man confused for believing that she had already finished work for that day. She clarifies that she still needs to review all the paperwork in the office, making Ulrich feel astonished with the amount of obligations under her responsibility. The young master asks, surprised, if she really takes care of the wheat farm during the day and still reviews bureaucratic documents at night, and she confirms shyly that yes. The young lady says goodbye, saying she will see him again only at dinner time, and he only nods in silence while watching her move away. The young man remains motionless in the hallway, following his wife's departure with a gaze loaded with anguish. At that instant, Arik is invaded by a deep feeling of guilt upon realizing that all that workload should be his responsibility, feeling ashamed for having lived in a selfish way while she suffered in his place. He reflects that his conscience would be much lighter if she at least showed some resentment or grudge against him. But the young lady never uttered a single word of complaint throughout all these years. Feeling the weight of his thoughts, the protagonist begins to limp slowly toward the mansion's office. Suddenly, a strong thud coming from a side hallway calls his attention and makes him stop immediately. He comes across the clumsy Marie fallen on the floor after tripping and knocking over a wooden box full of old letters, leaving her in complete despair. Marie cries without knowing what to do before that entire mess while the young man watches her with a confused expression. He kneels to help her collect the scattered paperwork and takes the opportunity to ask what all that sealed correspondence is about. The servant answers that they are old letters sent to her mistress, making Elric pick up one of the envelopes to analyze with more attention. The young master is quite impressed to notice the enormous amount of correspondence kept in that box. However, the young man's expression changes instantly, and his eyes widen upon recognizing the sender of one of the pieces of correspondence. He realizes that the letters were sent by the Webben family, remembering the terms of the political marriage agreement that sealed Tyria's fate. The protagonist opens the letter and begins to read attentively the content written by the young lady's father. In the text, Baron Webben insists for his daughter to give up waiting for a husband will never return and return home, even offering a new marriage to spare her from more suffering. Elric realizes that his father had transferred all the family's fortune to his name, leaving his daughter-in-law without a single cent even after 10 years of exclusive dedication to the Portman property. He rests the letter on the office's wooden table, recognizing that if his wife had taken all the inheritance for herself, it would only be a fair payment for her years of effort. The young man sits at the table and rests his head in his hands, questioning himself if Terrius's true reason for having remained there was only to preserve the legacy left by his late father-in-law. However, he still cannot understand the reason for her having dedicated so much to a cause that would not yield her any financial reward. Elric remains sitting in the luxurious office chair, completely engrossed in trying to uncover his wife's real intentions. He focuses his deep red eyes on the void, determined to find the answers he seeks about the young lady's behavior. He concludes that if her objective were purely the material inheritance, she would have already taken possession of all the assets and left the mansion about a year ago, right after the patriarch's death. The young man leans over the documents scattered on the table, trying to decipher the mystery that involved the young lady's devotion. He opens one of the desk drawers and comes across a pile of letters kept, concluding silently that his suspicions were correct. The young man analyzes the correspondence and realizes that the letters sent by the Wibben family began to arrive exactly a year ago. He notes that all the messages had the same objective of collecting the inheritance that his father had saved for him, and notes that his wife probably never answered any of them since the last letters went as far as to beg for an answer. Elric lets out a long sigh mixed with a bitter smile before that entire surprising situation. He realizes that Tyria was protecting the Portman family's heritage faithfully for an heir whose return was uncertain and never guaranteed. Knowing that not even the loyal coach Ronaldo knew the existence of those collections from his bride's family, the young man concludes that the young lady must have made a tremendous effort to hide the entire truth. The protagonist realizes with sorrow that his wife had been facing that difficult battle completely alone throughout the entire previous year. He observes Tyria working from afar in the fields and recognizes the impressive strength and determination of that young lady, so reserved. The young master reflects that he would not have the slightest right to blame her if she had simply taken the fortune for herself, questioning himself in thought why she chose to tread a path of so many trials. Meanwhile, in her private chambers, the young mistress settles before the vanity and begins to get ready for the meeting requested by her husband. She arranges her blonde hair delicately and ties a light satin ribbon bow behind her head. Wearing an elegant dark blue dress with lace details, Tyria observes her own reflection in the mirror with a quite serious and thoughtful expression. Suddenly, young maid Marie emerges in the room with red cheeks of excitement and celebrates that the moment finally arrived. The servant joins her hands and screams enthusiastically that the young master finally took the initiative to request a meeting alone with his wife. The girl makes a funny face and mutters that although his behavior in the bathhouse was unforgivable, she remembers the words of wisdom from butler Aldeo. Marie insists out loud that giving an heir to the family would also be wonderful for her mistress herself, leaving Sharia completely red and confused with such boldness. Unable to contain her exaggerated excitement, the maid begins to jump with joy through the room with bouncy little steps. She advances suddenly and grabs the skirt of her mistress's luxurious blue dress with a lot of force. Kneeling on the rug, Marie begs dramatically for her mistress to follow the experienced butler's recommendations. The maid sheds theatrical tears and warns that the young man is a shameless deviant who can run away from home at any moment for having abandoned her in the past, insisting that the best thing to do is for the two to get closer once and for all. With a hilarious and exaggerated expression, the servant screams with all her strength for the young lady to run to bed with her husband to order a baby soon. Marie begins to make outlandish plans to have two babies identical to her mistress to avoid that any of them inherit the young master's runaway and perverted personality, causing an enormous cold sweat of shame in Shariah. Fortunately for the young mistress, firm knocks on the door interrupt the limitless prattle of the clumsy maid. From outside, butler Aldeo asks politely if she is already ready for the commitment, and she answers in a hurry that she is already leaving the room. Shariah and the butler's firm steps begin to echo through the imposing wooden hallway while they head to the meeting room. The young woman descends the stairs, questioning herself anxiously about what the subject of the conversation would be, since that was the first time he had requested a private meeting with her. With soft movements, Aldeo holds the golden handles and opens the large double doors for the young mistress's entry. The experienced employee announces solemnly the mistress's arrival, while Elric waits patiently sitting at the table. The young master, who was enjoying a cup of tea calmly before the large sunny window, raises his gaze and wishes her a warm welcome. Tyria enters the elegant tea room with calm steps and a countenance slightly flushed with shyness. The sound of her shoe heels echoes through the environment while she approaches the tea table prepared to receive them. The young man takes one last sip of his drink in a thoughtful manner while observing his wife settling in front of him. Seen from above, the duo position themselves in the center of the imposing hall, decorated with classic furniture and bathed by sunlight. Without beating around the bush, Elric places the letter on the table and offers sincere apologies for having opened the correspondence without authorization. Explaining that he found them by chance fallen in the middle of the mess made by the maid, he touches a sealed envelope and asks in a direct manner if he could question her about the content of those mysterious letters. Tyria widens her eyes and lets out a light gasp of surprise upon realizing that her great secret was discovered by her husband. She lowers her head immediately, letting the shadow of her hair cover her face, taken by sudden anguish. In silent panic, the young lady fears that the young man might misunderstand her true intentions and start seeing her as a greedy woman without scruples interested only in the inheritance. The young man breaks the silence, commenting calmly that he discovered that she spent the entire last year ignoring solemnly all those collections from his family. He stares at her in a serious manner and confesses that he only called her there to obtain an answer for the reason for her having protected his inheritance with such tenacity, even without having any guarantee that he would return alive one day. Elric highlights that she could easily have taken possession of all the wealth for herself without anyone being able to her or judge her for it. Deep down, the young man understands that to her, he was nothing more than a complete stranger after a decade of total distancing. He reflects that the insistence of that unknown young lady in safeguarding the patrimony of an absent husband remained an incomprehensible mystery to his mind. He asks for her to reveal the truth about the reason for having refused to return to her homeland in Weben, even before her father's insistence. With her face partially shadowed and lips closed, the young lady mutters the family surname in a firm and solemn manner. She raises her head with determination and declares with her striking golden eyes that her official name now is Tyria Portman. The young lady states with pride and authority that she is no longer the mistress of Webben, but rather the legitimate mistress and protector of the entire Portman property. Without giving time for any response, she stands up abruptly and apologizes for needing to withdraw in a hurry for still having many pending obligations on the farm. The young mistress turns her back and moves away with quick and decided steps through the room, leaving her tea untouched on the table. Ulrich remains sitting in the chair with a drop of sweat on his forehead, completely stunned and without reaction before his wife's imposing and unexpected attitude. He observes in silence the void left by the young lady before the sunny window, trying to digest the impact of that powerful declaration of loyalty. Ulrich asks his wife why she decided to protect his part of the inheritance, even without having any guarantee that he would one day return alive, highlighting that she could very well have kept all the fortune for herself. Tyria hesitates for an instant and begins to stammer shyly, trying to find the right words to answer her husband's questioning. She swallows hard and gets intensely flushed cheeks while trying to contain her nervousness before the young man. Raising her gaze with firmness, the young lady stares at him with her striking golden eyes and answers with simplicity that she acted that way for being his wife. Meanwhile, in the office, Elric holds a small knife and jabs it thoughtfully against the room's wooden wall panel. Sitting in his chair, the young master reflects in silence about everything that happened and his companion's real motivations. He remembers the young lady's strong declaration affirming that she now belongs to the Portman family and that she will assume the responsibility and duty of protecting that property. The sound of the blade clashing against the wall echoes through the silent room while he continues lost in his thoughts. Elric questions himself if the true Higgins feeling behind that cold and formal answer was only the sense of duty of a noble woman. He realizes that she protected the entire remaining patrimony not out of greed but to fulfill her obligation, an altruistic attitude that makes him remember instantly an old acquaintance from the past. The young man brings to memory the figure of Elvis Graham, a man who marked his military trajectory deeply. Elric recalls that he met Elvis on the battlefield as the third son of an influential family that had hired him as a mercenary during a territorial war. Despite having achieved victory with few casualties, the triumph was not complete as Elvis ended up suffering serious injuries that left him permanently in a wheelchair. Even incapacitated from fighting, the noble maintained a haughty posture and stated that he needed to continue fulfilling his social role. He used to say that those born into nobility carried the burden of setting an example for others and that war was only the stage for him to exercise his duty. At the time, Elric even questioned him if it was contradictory to act that way, being only the son of a concubine and half commoner. With a sarcastic smile, Elvis answered that he preferred to see himself as half noble, and that by fulfilling half of his obligations, he ended up sacrificing half of his own body. Fulfilling what he had promised, the man retired from combat to live in a quiet manner and ended up marrying a few years later. Back to reality, the protagonist removes the blade from the wooden wall with a firm movement. He mutters to himself about the weight of the words responsibility and duty that so much seem to guide his wife's actions. Although he recognizes that he will never be able to repay Tyrius 10 years of sacrifice, the young man knows he is not totally tied hand and foot before that situation. Aware that the young lady's greedy family will continue sending correspondence collecting the inheritance, he deduces that their apparent physical absence is due to some impediment and not for lack of desire. Knowing that his wife will never reveal her deepest feelings, even if he insists on the subject, Elric decides to act on his own. Fortunately, the young man plans an alternative path to discover the entire truth behind that story once and for all. With that, a carriage travels toward the luxurious property of the Wyben family. Elric arrives before the iron gates of the imposing mansion and concludes that the best strategy at the moment is to make a direct approach. The young master walks elegantly through the garden, recognizing the grandeur of the place and feeling confident for the confrontation that is to come. Meanwhile, from inside the residence, the hosts have already been informed of the visit and comment with disdain about the young man's audacity in finally showing his face. Baron Wyben and his wife walk hurriedly through the hallways, distilling poison against their son-in-law and calling him an unusable wretch of humble origin. The Baroness complains furiously that he should have disappeared forever and accuses the young man of having returned only to sniff around and steal their daughter's inheritance. With a gloomy and greedy look, the Baron worries about the possibility of the young man trying to claim his legal rights over the fortune left by Hoven. The couple of nobles follow with quick steps toward the visiting room to confront the unwanted visitor. They walk side by side to the luxurious rooms, determined not to allow the young man to keep the assets of the Portman family. The Baron rails irritably, labeling his son-in-law as a piece of self-interested trash who only cares about money. His wife agrees fully and adds that the young man wasted an entire decade of Tyria's life, remembering dramatically all the high cost and effort they took to raise the young lady. The greedy noble focuses his attention on the valuable inheritance left by the late patriarch of the Portmans. They march decided convinced that they need to confiscate that fortune to compensate for all the supposed damages they suffered. With a sudden movement, the Baron holds the golden handle and opens the meeting room door. Upon entering, they come across Elric, elegantly dressed and leaning on his cane, waiting patiently for his in-law's arrival. The young master bows politely and introduces himself formally as Elric Portman, offering sincere apologies for the long delay in coming to visit them. Sitting at the table with his arms crossed, the Baron comments with irony about the 10-year disappearance, while his wife pretends to understand the situation with a fake smile behind her fan. Without losing time with formalities, the young man mentions directly that he had the opportunity to read the letter sent by them to his mansion. The father-in-law finds it ridiculous that the young man only read the message now but insists on accelerating the conversation, stating that he sent the letter out of pure paternal concern for his daughter's abandonment. He accuses Elric of being a shameless person for having abandoned Tyria after the Wyvern family helped elevate the Portmans to the status of nobility. Mentioning greedily the great inheritance left by the late patriarch, The Baron lets out a laugh of mockery and insults openly his son-in-law's humble origin, ironizing the fact that he returned crippled and questioning his capacity and right to manage any fortune.